Hi, this is Lila Gardunia, and today I'm going to show you how to foundation paper piece my Scrappy Half-Rectangle Triangles. This is a video specifically for these triangles, but the process can be applied to any type of foundation paper piecing in any pattern. So before we get started, let's go over what you'll need. You'll need foundations. I'm going to be using this foundation that came from my Scrappy Half-Rectangle Triangle foundation pad. You're going to need some basic supplies like a rotary cutter and scissors and flathead pins. You'll also need some sort of straight edge for folding the paper back. This is just a little piece of really lightweight cardboard, chipboard. You can use postcard or a piece of cardstock. Anything like that would work. I also am going to be using an add a quarter ruler. This will make trimming block pieces really easy. And then some scraps and a regular ruler for trimming the final block. These Scrappy Half-Rectangle Triangles are a great way to go and bust through some of your scraps. This is actually leftover binding strips from my last quilt that we're going to use here. So let's get started. The first step is to cut the foundations apart so you can piece each one separately. There's a line, it says cut here. Done. Then we need to pick out fabric. I suggest if you really want to play up the secondary designs and to really see some contrast here, I suggest using fabric that's significantly darker than the rest of the fabric in the darker shaded areas. So I'm going to use blue in section 1 and 4. It's a really good idea to write what goes in what section because it gets easy to get messed up. So I'm going to write blue and blue. And then I think I want to go aqua, yellow, aqua. Or aqua, aqua, yellow. Aqua, yellow, aqua. Okay. There's so many different combinations that you can just keep piecing forever and try them all out. Makes it extra fun. All right. Once you've decided which fabrics you want to put where and which fabrics you want to use, we need to, I like to kind of cut them down a little bit, and I want to show you how you can know if you have enough fabric for an area. This is section number 1, and I want this blue fabric to cover this section by at least 1/4 of an inch. I would recommend a 1/2 inch on all sides, and it needs to go all the way out to the edge of the paper. Kind of looking under there, there's the end of the blue. It definitely is taller. You don't need to trim it down, we're just rough cutting. I'm cutting our things, and I'm gonna cut another piece for this guy over here. All right, and then we need a blue piece for this while we're doing blues. Now, when I line it up along the largest edge, it's really tight, so we're not going to use that. I'm going to hold this. I know it's definitely wide enough. I can put it over and see that there's a lot on each side, so now I have to worry about the length. I go lay it on the longest side, make sure that it overlaps into the seam allowance and overlaps on the top here by a good 1/2 inch. It is much better to make your pieces oversized than to try to save fabric and then come up short. It's a real pain. It's a real pain to have to unpick and start over. We don't need that. Let's cut this yellow piece. Now, when there's a triangle like that, you can either cut a large rectangle and cut it in half, but that often gets messed up, to be honest. So we're not going to do that. We're going to play it safe, and I'm going to just cut a rectangle. It'll be connected to section 1, so this will be the stitching line. So I need it to go from like about a 1/2 inch up here all the way down to here. So I'm just gonna lay that there. And I know I need it about like that. And then how wide? I need it to go from outside the seam allowance to about a 1/2 inch over. And there. Because we're cutting these oversized, it doesn't have to be exact. We're cutting one for that. Now the aqua, and the easy thing is that now that I know what size I needed for the yellow, I can use the same size fabric about for the aqua, this long. So this is section 4, this is section 5, and this would be the seam line. That means that the fabric will be opening down like that. Again, bigger in this case is better. So err on the side of caution. Give yourself a lot of wiggle room because we don't need to be unpicking stuff. In foundation paper piecing, the fabric is placed on the wrong side of the foundation paper. And then we sew on the printed side of the foundation paper on these straight lines. So if you hold, we're going to do a lot of holding up to the light, and it might not show up on video, but I'm holding this up to the light and making sure that the blue covers all of the blue section and extends out by at least 1/4 inch, preferably a little bit more. And I give it a pin with a flathead pin. So have our straight edge. This is section 1. We're gonna attach section 2. So we want to put our straight edge along on the line between section 1 and 2, fold it back, put our 1/4 inch, add a 1/4 ruler there, and trim. Now you can definitely take a regular ruler, measure a 1/4 inch from the paper, and cut. This straight edge will make it really easy to attach the next piece of fabric. Next, I am attaching a yellow piece. I'm going to put the yellow piece right sides together with the blue, and I'm going to hold it up to the light and make sure that the yellow extends out into the seam allowance and that it's going to cover the yellow section completely. If you're not sure or want to double check, sometimes this is pretty straightforward, but sometimes there are weird shapes. You can pin or baste along the line and then flip it over and see how it goes. This is more than long enough and goes far enough out. Now when we go to sew, we're going to turn this over and stitch on this line between section 1 and section 2. But sometimes when you flip it over, these floppy ends can flop around and get stuck in the seam, and that is not fun to unpick. So if you have a large piece, I recommend pinning in place, and then everything stays nice and sturdy and in place. All right, let's go over to the sewing machine and we'll do our first seam. All right, we're over here at the sewing machine. have a regular presser foot, and I've decreased the stitch length to 1.4. You can do 1.5 also. I wouldn't recommend you going any higher. The shorter stitch length is going to make it easy to pull the papers off at the very end. So we're going to start sewing outside the seam allowance. There's a little crease here that you can use as a guide or kind of eyeball it. We're going to just sew along the line and sew about a 1/2 inch outside of it. All right, move the pin and keep sewing. You just sew right on the line, easy peasy lemon squeezy, and go for about a 1/2 inch. It's pretty forgiving. Now we need to press this yellow down. But I like how it makes everything nice and crisp and for sure smooth and nice. Section 2 added. Again, I'm gonna pin this down preemptively so it doesn't flap all over when we add the next piece. So 1, 2, and now we add 3. Put the straight edge on the line, fold it back, place our add a 1/4 ruler on, and trim it to a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, here's our next little piece. Now this is kind of jagged here. You can either line up the straight edge and just have the jagged edge extend a little farther, which is probably what I would do. This side is a little bit straighter. Or you can straighten it out to make lining it up super easy. All right, so I'm going to add it here. I'm making sure that it goes very far off the seam allowance, all the way. You can put your fingernails right there and put the other finger on the opposite side, and you'll know that that's where the section stops. So you can go here and say, oh, I have, let's do this. With the section stopping here, I have a good 1/2 inch plus, so I'm good to go. Back to the sewing machine. So we're going to sew on this line between sections 1 and section 3. It doesn't matter which side you start on. I'm gonna start here in the middle of the block and sew out to the seam allowance. And you can kind of see the little crease that was made when we folded the paper back. So I'm just going to start well back. Follow the crease, sew on the line, and off the side. All right, we've sewn the 3rd piece, the aqua piece, on. Now I'm going to press it open. And there we go, all nice and straight. And I am gonna pin this down also so it doesn't get caught in the seam as we do the next pieces. So, done 1, 2, 3. Now we do 4. So I'm going to trim on this line. And I do have a pin there, so let's get rid of that. And we'll put it right here. So I put my straight edge along the line. I fold this back. And now at this point, you'll see that I've sewn onto the foundation. And all you do is you just pull it off. It comes off really easy, no problem. It doesn't damage the foundation in a way that's going to cause a problem. The little holes that it makes won't be an issue. Okay, we have section 4, blue, So I'm going to put it there, and then I'm going to do that little fingernail thing here and here to make sure. So that's where it is, and it extends well past that on both sides. Foundation paper piecing really is this easy. It's fold, trim, sew, press over and over again. So now we're to the sewing part. Now we're going to sew on the line between the blue and the yellow. We're going to start sewing along the crease outside of the seam allowance. Jump onto the line and stay on the line all the way down, and then off the side about a ½ inch, more or less. Now we're going to press open again. When these seams start to get a little longer, it's often a good idea to set the seam first, just like you would with a regular piecing. That helps the stitches really integrate and get down into the fabric, and that helps the seams lay flatter. So I'm just going to give this a good press. You're not moving. All right, we're almost there. It doesn't look like much yet, but it's going to be awesome. All right, I have quite a bit hanging over there, so I'm just gonna cut that off. And then we're adding the aqua piece 5 to the blue 4. Fold back along that line, trim, and then we're going to add this piece. I'm going to give it a little press. All right, that's a lot nicer. So it's going to go along here, but I want to be really sure it's going to go in the right place. So again, I'm going to put my fingernail where it absolutely has to go. It has to cover the seam allowance, and it has to cover here and then beyond by a ½ inch. And we're gonna go sew. Again, we're using a short stitch so that we'll be able to trim it off, tear off the papers when we're done piecing. Let's take out these pins. Open this up, can hold it up to the light to make sure that the fabric covers the entire section, and it does with a lot to spare, but again, better safe than sorry. Now we're adding on section 6. This, we're doing it just like the other ones. We're putting our straight edge along the line. I'm gonna pull this fabric back, and if it goes like this where there's a little bit of the paper sticking on it, that's okay too. It's okay if that like teeny tiny bit of paper gets trimmed off, not a problem. Now we're going to trim it to size. Now my 6-inch at a quarter ruler doesn't cover the whole seam. I could trim here and then move this up and trim the rest of the way, which I often do, or you can use a longer ruler. This is a 12-inch ruler. Trimming it off. Next, we're going to talk about how to cut and add the background triangles, because it can be a little bit tricky if you're using print fabric. I've gone ahead and made another one, so we have a left facing and right facing block, and then all of the instructions you're going to need are right here in the front of the foundation pad. So there's instructions for cutting the background triangles. You'll want to cut 4.5 by 9-inch rectangles from your background fabric, and then we'll need to cut them from corner to corner. But in this case, direction does really matter when we're cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and just for demonstration's sake, cut this in half up towards the left. And we have this. I can put it right here on this cute triangle. And then this one, it doesn't work. And if I rotate it, it doesn't work. Only if I flip it over does it work. But then I can't see my print. So with prints, you do need to pay close attention to this cutting diagram here. If you don't want to worry about which way to cut your triangles, I recommend using a solid fabric or something that is the same on both sides, like a batik. Because, let me demo this, it doesn't matter which way you cut the fabric. So if we remember, when I cut it this way last time, it only worked on one of the blocks. So we got that looking good. And then, oh no, this one doesn't fit. But since it's solid, I can flip it over. And this makes life so easy. But there's another trick that also makes life easy with prints. So we've got these guys here. We would need to cut 2 different directions to get background blocks for these. But if you put your fabric wrong sides together, just like it comes off the bolt, if you're cutting from yardage, have one face down and one face up, and cut from corner to corner. Let's see what we got. So we have that one that works with that. From the bottom, we have another background triangle that will work with our remaining foundation paper pieced triangle. This is what I do, and it's really easy to cut it right off the bolt. Now that we've cut our background triangles, we're going to sew them on. Now, sometimes it can get a little hard to figure out how to line this up and where it's going to open up. So I made a little diagram here. If you hold this up to the light and can see the dotted line, you're going to want this triangle to be about 3/4 of an inch above that dotted line. And after you've been doing this for a bit, it'll just be easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now that I've stitched that final seam and pressed them open, I'm ready to trim them to size and get all these crazy edges off. This is pretty straightforward. We just need to trim on this dotted line. It's sometimes hard to see if you're exactly on the dotted line. A simpler way to see that is by lining up the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler to this inner solid line. Line the inner solid line up with the 1/4 inch mark and just trim all the way around. Yay, they're so cute. And one of the fun things about these scrappy triangles is that you can do lots of fun things with them. You can put them together to make an equilateral-ish triangle. You can put them like this, or you can put them like this. And this would look even cooler if we had 2 more. So we had a diamond with this zigzaggy blue design. There's so many options, and you are going to have a blast playing around with these and designing your own quilt. Now, when you have your quilt all sewn together, all of the blocks sewn together, it'll be time to take out the foundations. I'm going to demo this, but I wouldn't take them off, take the paper off until this block was sewn all around to other blocks, because there's so many weird bias edges that it'll stretch out if it doesn't have the paper there to stabilize it and keep it in place. But all you do is you just rip it off. That little corner stayed in, but just rip that off. And it just is, actually it's really satisfying. The papers come out really easily because it's printed on this thin paper and we use that short stitch length. So it shouldn't be a big deal at all. This is a great sit down and watch a movie while you pull all the papers out type activity. Thanks for being here. I hope you have as much fun sewing these half rectangle triangles and making your own fun quilts as I did designing them. They're a great scrap buster, but most of all, they're a lot of fun. So have fun sewing, and I'll see you next time.